So we need to make the loop counter start at 0, so that all the objects in the array will get totaled. Okay, now in earlier versions of Visual Studio, you had to stop the debugger and restart the application to see these changes take effect. But there's a feature now called Hot Reload that will let us see these code changes in the running application. Hot Reload was actually introduced in Visual Studio 2019 as a preview feature, but it's fully integrated in VS 2022 and .NET 6. I'll click Hot Reload in the menu here. And you can see the app is still running. I'll hit F10, which brings the cursor back to the calling code in program.cs. And let's just run the app from here by clicking the Continue button at the top. And let's actually remove this breakpoint so the code doesn't break again. You do that just by clicking on the breakpoint in the left margin to remove it. Now let's go to the running app and select to total the expenses. Now the total is $30. I'll view the expenses again and let's double check that. So the calculation is now correct. We've successfully debugged the error, implemented the fix, and tested it. Before we leave Visual Studio, I want to show you another feature that's really useful. When you're debugging through methods getting called from different classes, it can get confusing. It's hard to keep track of where you are in the code and where the method was called from. Let's look at this Expense Manager class. You saw in program.cs that the constructor for this class was called right at the beginning, when the app first started. In this constructor, it creates a new instance of a class called Data Initializer and calls the createSampleExpenses method on that class. Let's right-click on this method and go to Definition. And the shortcut is F12. That opens the Data Initializer class and brings us right into the method. So this code creates a new list of type expense and populates it with 3 new expenses, and returns this list to the calling method in the Expense Manager class. Let's set a breakpoint at the start of this method. We're still debugging the running app, so let's stop that. And let's run the app again, so the expense data gets recreated. As the app is starting, the breakpoint gets hit and the code is stopped. So we're debugging deep inside this super complex application, and we might not know exactly how we got here, or we can't remember all the method calls that led up to this point. If we go to the Debug menu, under Windows, let's choose the Call Stack window. That brings up this window that has the hierarchy of method calls, with the current one, where our code is paused, right up at the top. Below that is the Expense Manager constructor method, where this one was called from. You can actually click right on that method in the Call Stack window, and it will bring you there. Notice though that it didn't actually move the cursor. Our code is still paused inside the createSampleExpenses method above. That's why the calling code here is green. If you hit F10 to advance the debugging cursor, it will bring you to the next line of code where the debugger is stopped. But we can trace back farther too, right back to where the call started, in program.cs. So this is really helpful when you're trying to form a mental map of how your code is structured, and it helps you with looking for the source of a problem earlier in the call stack. Let's click on the top method again, where the code is stopped, and that brings us back to the currently executing line of code. We can hit F10 to go to the next line. If you're anywhere inside a method and you just want to let the method execute and then resume debugging in the method that called this one, you can do that by stepping out of the method. The shortcut for that is Shift F11. So just remember, F11 is to step into the method, and Shift F11 is to step out of a method. So those are some debugging basics in Visual Studio. We'll go into a lot more features throughout the course, but these are really the core features that you're going to be using all the time. Next, let's see some of the features of Visual Studio Code.